I still remember the scent of roses and resentment. It was my sister's wedding. A five-star ballroom lit like a palace violins echoing through polished glass and gold. And me, I wasn't even seated at a guest table. I was holding a tray. Not metaphorically, an actual tray of champagne flutes trembling slightly in my hands as I moved between tightly packed groups of laughter sequins and congratulatory hugs. No one looked at me. No one asked why the bride's youngest sister was serving drinks in heels she borrowed and a dress she couldn't afford. Mother had said earlier, just before the guests arrived, "Let the successful ones shine. Don't embarrass us tonight." That was her way of saying stay invisible, like I'd always been. They said it wasn't personal, just for the image. But when the speeches began, my father toasting to the future of our family and my sister's rise as an investment banker, there was no mention of the girl who used to write essays on napkins in the kitchen, the one who read about justice and global policies when everyone else was watching reality shows. In my pocket was a folded-up paper. My human rights research proposal rejected again. No one asked what I'd been working on. No one even noticed I wasn't seated. I just existed between empty glasses and crumpled napkins. And when the cake was cut and the room erupted into camera flashes, I quietly slipped out the back door. I stood under a flickering kitchen light, the tray finally lowered, hands still sticky with frosting and sweat. And I thought, maybe silence isn't the punishment. Maybe it's the disguise. That night, as they danced under chandeliers, I packed my bag. Tomorrow I would leave, and this time no one would bother to stop me. I left before sunrise. No tears, no notes, just a small suitcase, one pair of shoes, and the final piece of dignity I hadn't yet handed over. The front gate creaked like it wanted to ask where I was going, but even that was quieter than my family had been. They didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't care. What they never knew was this. 2 months before the wedding, I had quietly won a full scholarship, a research program in Geneva, one of only 3 accepted worldwide. I hadn't told anyone, not out of secrecy, but out of self-preservation. I'd grown used to their reactions. "That's cute. Why don't you do something practical instead? Stop chasing fairy tales." So I stopped chasing their approval instead. At the airport, I sat by the window with my passport in one hand and my old proposal in the other. The same one they laughed at. The same one I had rewritten 5 times alone after midnight in a bedroom without a lock. I deleted every trace of myself that morning. Social media gone, emails archived, last name changed. Not because I was ashamed, but because I needed a clean slate, a place where no one would call me dramatic, lazy, or too intense. I'd been too much for them and not enough at the same time. The flight to Geneva took 9 hours. I didn't sleep, but for the first time I felt awake. When I landed, the air was cold and quiet. No one knew my name, and that somehow felt like freedom. Geneva was beautiful, but beauty doesn't keep you warm when your attic window won't shut and your bank balance reads double digits. I lived in a tiny room above an old bakery. The rent was cheap because the heating didn't work and the stairs creaked like ghosts. The slanted roof was so low I had to duck just to change my clothes. I taped plastic over the window and wore 2 coats indoors. During the day, I cleaned hotel rooms. In the evenings, I waited tables at a Turkish cafe where tourists never left tips and locals barely noticed me. Sometimes I'd pretend I didn't understand French just to avoid their pity. At night, I'd boil water in a kettle and pour it over instant noodles, the kind with faded instructions in languages I didn't speak. I didn't care. I ate fast. I slept light. I learned to stop expecting. There were nights I cried in the cafe's back bathroom. Not loud, just the kind of crying that slips down your collar and leaves salt in your throat. One time, a coworker knocked and asked if I was okay. I said, "Just tired." He nodded. That was enough. Invisible in every room, that's how I felt. But I never missed a lecture, never skipped a deadline. I showed up to class with calloused hands and underlined books. I knew what I wanted, even if no one else saw it yet. Some nights I whispered to myself, "This is the price of becoming someone they can't ignore." It was a Thursday afternoon, cold. the kind that makes your knuckles sting and your breath feel heavy. I wasn't meant to speak that day. I was just attending a university immigration panel, mostly to take notes for a class, maybe snag a free coffee. The room was full of nervous energy. A group of students from different continents sat at the front, invited to share their stories. Halfway through, an African student, David, I think, stood up to talk about visa discrimination. He spoke softly with perfect posture, but you could see the pain in the way he held his hands. Then a moderator interrupted, said something about security checks being standard, said it too sharply, too dismissively. The room fell quiet. My heart raced. I knew that tone. I'd heard it too many times directed at me at people who don't look like they belong. I stood up. I didn't plan to, I just did. I walked to the front, turned to the moderator, and said with every ounce of calm I had, standard procedure should never come with selective suspicion. I quoted 2 policy articles, cited 3 international agreements. My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't flinch. And then I sat back down. No applause, no drama, just silence. But something shifted. After the panel, a woman tapped me on the shoulder. Young, sharp-eyed, she introduced herself as a UN intern. That was brave, she said. Would you mind if I passed your name along to someone? I smiled politely like it wasn't a big deal, but inside I was shaking. That night I walked home in the snow with a new thought. Maybe I don't have to scream to be heard. Maybe I just have to speak when it matters. The email came 3 weeks later. A junior position research assistant at the UN Office of Human Rights. Temporary contract, modest stipend, no benefits, no promises. I said yes in under 10 minutes. On my first day, I wore the only blazer I owned, borrowed shoes, and a bag filled with secondhand notebooks. I didn't speak much. I took notes, listened, stayed late to recheck citations others overlooked. I never mentioned my past. Not the attic apartment, not the wedding, not the tray of glasses or the note in my pocket. Silence, I had learned, can be a sanctuary. They gave me spreadsheets, reports, dry tasks. I did them quietly, precisely. Over time, someone noticed, then another. I was asked to translate a document, first French, then Spanish, then Swahili. I didn't tell them I taught myself at night by watching YouTube videos with subtitles and scribbling notes during cleaning shifts. I began drafting memos, cross-referencing policies, organizing youth discussions, writing speeches no one knew I wrote. I still lived small, walked to work, packed lunches, read on buses. I never posted pictures. I never joined Friday dinners. But my name slowly began to circulate in quiet corridors. In 3 years, I moved from temporary to permanent, from assistant to coordinator, then to policy consultant. I built my reputation in silence. I wasn't chasing spotlight. I was building a backbone, and every time someone said, "You're so composed," I smiled. Because they didn't know I came from a place where silence was survival. Now it was strength. The promotion came on a rainy Thursday. Regional Director of a UN Youth Initiative focused on human rights education in post-conflict zones. I stared at the offer letter for almost 10 minutes, rereading every word. It wasn't just a job title, it was validation. Not from the world, but from the part of me that once cried in a staff bathroom with dish soap on her hands. I accepted quietly. No celebration, no champagne, just a walk along the lake coast, zipped to my chin, watching the fog roll in over the water, like a soft, steady reminder, stay grounded. But this new role came with a strange requirement: visibility. I was now expected to speak, to represent, to appear. The first time I stood behind a podium, I almost backed out. But I saw a girl in the audience, maybe 17, holding a notebook just like I used to. Her eyes were wide, unsure, just like mine had been. So I spoke, clearly, briefly, honestly, not with grandeur, not with power, just with purpose. Afterward, someone said, "You speak like you mean every word." I replied, "Because I do." More invitations followed, interviews, forums, roundtables. I chose carefully. I never chased headlines. I never tried to look impressive. I let the work speak, let the quiet facts rise louder than applause. People began to recognize me, but not by my face, by my voice, by the words I chose. and the silences I protected. That was enough. It was almost poetic, really. The international summit was scheduled in my home country, the same place I had quietly escaped years ago, clutching a suitcase and a rejected dream. Now they wanted me to represent the United Nations Youth Human Rights Initiative as its keynote ambassador. I accepted, quietly, gratefully, with a calm that surprised me. The event was to be held at a luxury hotel in the capital, one I vaguely remembered from a distant memory. When I saw the address, my heart skipped. It was the same hotel where my sister was hosting her second wedding. Different groom, same glitter, different chapter, same script. I didn't tell anyone. I had no desire to reclaim anything. I just wanted to do my job. Serve the cause, not the drama. On the day of the summit, I arrived early, wore navy blue hair pulled back. I walked through the hotel's lobby, unnoticed, just another woman in a modest suit. Until the UN delegation entered behind me, dozens of representatives, media in tow press badges flashing like blinking stars. Someone in the lobby asked, "Who are they looking for?" And I heard it my name, not the one they used to mock, the full name, clear, respected. "We're here to honor Ms. Dati _ one delegate said. The room turned. My sister froze mid-laugh. Her new husband blinked. My mother dropped a fork that clattered against porcelain. My father stiffened like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't look at them. I turned to the delegation, smiled gently, and said, "Thank you for coming. Shall we begin?" 2 days later, it began. Someone, an old family friend, maybe a cousin, leaked an old photo. Grainy, poorly lit. There I was, bent over a cafe table in Geneva, apron on clearing dishes, hair tied back with a rubber band. A moment frozen in exhaustion. The headline practically wrote itself, from Maid to UN director, her secret past revealed. Tabloids fed on it. Was her story real? Did she use poverty as a stepping stone? Some called me inspirational, others called me a fraud. It didn't hurt, at least not the way it would have before, but it did twist something inside me. Not because they called me a maid, but because they said it like it was something shameful. I was quiet for a day, let the noise echo. Then I responded. A single post, a white background, black letters. Yes, I once served food. Now I serve justice. Both require dignity. No hashtags, no filters, no drama. It was shared 1.4 million times in 48 hours. Some wrote to say thank you. Others to confess they too had scrubbed floors, worked in kitchens, folded shirts under fluorescent lights while dreaming of something more. The world responded not with pity but with recognition. The photo didn't humiliate me, it reminded me. Before I sat at tables of power, I cleaned the ones they ate at, and that never made me less. The invitation came by email. Subject line, "Dinner at home, let's catch up." I almost deleted it, but curiosity is a stubborn thing, and so is closure. My sister was facing a scandal, accused of falsifying financial reports at her firm, whispers of a potential investigation. My name had started floating around, not because I was involved, but because I worked for the UN. They assumed I had connections, influence, maybe even pull. So they hosted a dinner, table set with fine china, crystal glasses, wine I used to be told not to touch. They greeted me like nothing ever happened, my girl. "Look at you. You look powerful. We always knew you were different," they said too loudly, too rehearsed. My mother smiled like she hadn't once whispered that I was an embarrassment. My sister laughed, saying, "So, you really work with the UN, huh? Think you could look into something for me?" Her tone light, but her eyes calculating. Then my father raised his glass and said, "We're still family, right?" I looked around the table, at the hands that never reached for me when I left, at the mouths that were silent when I needed words. I placed my glass down. Only when I became useful again I asked. No one answered. So I did. I won't intervene. This isn't my fight, and even if it was, I'm not here to clean up anymore. I left before dessert. The summit hall in Geneva was silent as I approached the podium. This was the closing keynote. Delegates from over 40 countries, youth leaders, survivors, activists. My colleagues sat near the front. Cameras blinked like watchful eyes, but I didn't feel small. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I looked out across the room not for recognition, but connection. And then I spoke. Families are supposed to be sanctuaries, but sometimes they are shadows. I know what it feels like to be invisible at your own table. I know the silence that isn't peaceful, it's punishment. And I know the hunger not for food, but for someone to say, "You matter even when you fail." We have to stop demanding that women succeed in order to earn basic respect. We are not what we do. We are who we are even when we're lost, even when we're tired, even when we're still learning. The room was quiet when I finished. Then someone stood, then another, and another, a standing ovation. Not for the performance, there was none, just truth. Later that night, I walked home alone through the quiet streets of Geneva, past the lake, past the bakery that used to be my ceiling. The same street I once rushed down to make it to class on time, shoes soaked, heart heavy. But this time I wasn't hurrying. I didn't feel lonely, just peaceful. I passed by a storefront. My reflection caught in the glass. Same eyes, new gaze. I touched my name badge, still their last name, but it meant something different now. Because I had rewritten the story. And I whispered to myself, I kept their name, but I rebuilt what it meant.